Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome everyone to the January 2022 Community IT Innovators webinar series. We're so happy that you could join us today for today's webinar on 2022 IT trends. This is an annual event that we've been doing for the last 6 or 7 years at Community IT, where we take a moment at the beginning of the year to review all of the trends that we're seeing in nonprofit technology and to provide you with some insights on where we see things going with IT. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT.
I'm Steve. I'm Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I'm glad to be here today.
Our Chief Technology Officer, Matthew Eshelman. Matt, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, it's great to be here, talk about some IT trends. Looking forward to our conversation and any input that you all have today. So great to be with you.
All right. So related to that is our next trend. We're doubling down on going serverless. More and more organizations are getting rid of their servers. Even large organizations, most organizations now, except for those with very specific and specialized line of business application needs, are able to get rid of their servers, even if they're planning on coming back to an office with printers. And printers had sort of been the final thing that servers were taking responsibility for. And now they're not even needed for that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think the reason that organizations can go serverless is really, I think in the last 2 years, the transition, files were kind of like the last bastion of, those holding organizations back. I think organizations have needed to move their systems into the cloud just to work and be productive over the last 2 years. And so, again, I think SharePoint Online has really improved significantly, and so it's practical for organizations to do some of those lift and shift migrations into SharePoint. Again, Google Workspace again has a better way of managing traditional file and folder structures, and so that's made it a lot easier. And so then the only thing that's hanging around on-prem are the print servers, which is really at the end people need to print, but there have
less
been
than they used to.
Less than they used to, but there are technology solutions now that make it really easy and practical to manage printing, to do all of the stuff that you had needed a server to do previously. Now there's some good applications that allow that cloud management so that you don't need that on-premise server to run those systems anymore.
It's worth clarifying what we're talking about just a little bit. So the challenge, laptops can print to printers pretty easily. They don't need a printer server anymore because the printers themselves are kind of sort of self-service. You send a job to a particular IP address that a printer has, and the printer gets the job and says, I'll print this, and prints it. The challenge for organizations that have a lot of computers, and when I say a lot, I mean more than a handful, is that if you introduce a new printer, you need to sort of tell all of those laptops that this new printer exists. Well, when Community IT got a new printer a few years ago, we just told everybody, hey, there's a new printer. Here's its IP address. Deal with it. But we're all IT people. We could, you told us the model of it. Okay, we'll go online and find the driver, download the driver, install it on our computers, and we're all printing. And that's kind of, how that went. I think probably someone had to help our HR person who's not an IT person. But everybody else, you sort of grew up in an IT world and was able to take care of themselves. That's not the case for most organizations. So how do you deploy a new printer to a lot of different computers? And that's where a cloud printing service, where you can get a cloud printing service agent on all your computers because you have a way to manage all of your computers. And once you have that agent in place, then if you add a new printer, you just sort of tell all the computers at once, hey, here's a new printer. The computers are still printing to the printer directly, sort of without being mediated by a service. What you're doing with the service is sort of installing new drivers and adding printers with their correct IP address and their correct configuration to the laptops. And if you're trying to do that at scale, if you only have 3 people in your office, just go manually add each printer one by one, and don't pay for a service. But if you have 50 computers, it makes sense to do something like that at that kind of a scale with a service that you push one button and it deploys to all of your 50 computers.
So basically, if you have a server and its warranty is expiring, you should look seriously at going serverless, at not replacing it at all, and talk to your IT team about some of the implications of that. So the next trend is something that we didn't predict this at all, although I think we maybe could have. Well, we're not in the insurance industry, but 2020 was a landmark year for the insurance industry for a couple of reasons, but one of them was for cybersecurity claims, which exceeded premiums. They basically blew out the underwriting that had happened for 2020 because of the number, the severity, and the cost of cybersecurity incidents that year. So the insurance industry responded pretty swiftly by raising premiums and by adding more specific and relevant requirements to obtaining a cybersecurity liability policy. And that's something that we experienced directly, and many of the organizations that we work with experienced as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this maybe was a miss in terms of where we thought things were going to go in 2021. Like, I think what we saw going into the year was that more and more organizations were realizing that they didn't have adequate coverage for cyber kind of cybersecurity events or incidents, and so they were getting cybersecurity insurance or cyber liability insurance. But I know I was really shocked at how quickly the underwriting requirements changed going, kind of very early on in the year, like, I don't know, March or something. Some of the traditional carriers that we had a lot of clients going through, all of a sudden had much, much more stringent application requirements that had to be in place before they would even consider the application. So, just over a period of a couple of years, we went from basically like, just put your name on the list and we'll give you a policy, to, hey, do you have any basic controls in place, to, you have to have MFA on everything, every system in your organization. If it can be remotely accessed, it has to have MFA. And that means VPNs, file servers, remote desktop, all of that, asking for designated CISO, Chief Internet Security Officer, roles at an organization, expecting formal policy requirements around incident response, business continuity planning, including formal security awareness training as a mandate that organizations must complete before underwriting would complete. And then again, going beyond the basics of patching and backups to requiring more sophisticated endpoint protection like EDR, endpoint detection and response, included as kind of a baseline standard. And so I think that has been a really big jump, and has caused a lot of disruption for organizations. I know we had to do a lot of work for a number of organizations to really bring those security standards up to meet the underwriting requirements. Otherwise, they either weren't going to get coverage at all, or they would have had significant price increases related to their policy coverage.
I feel like, and you can argue with me, Matt, because you've definitely been on the front lines of this a lot more than I have, but I feel like the pendulum's sort of swinging a little bit, like it may be a little bit of an overreaction. Some of the requirements seem like they do not fit super well to a small, and don't really address the risks right, perfectly. I mean, we definitely we appreciate that MFA is required, for example, but there are certain requirements. It's like, really, and I feel like it's just a period of adjustment and transition, and so that's it's not surprising that the balance is still being found.
Yeah, and I think given the as Johan identified, the financial loss that the sector incurred, it's probably going to be a while before those, standards are relaxed, if anything. And we know in general that, uh, the amount of loss kind of associated with cyber attacks kind of is only increasing, year after year. And there's different avenues that go, that comes, kind of comes through. And yeah, I do think that maybe some of that stuff is a little bit um, over prescribed, and that, the real source of a lot of these, kind of data breaches is still, pretty basic stuff related to, individual, kind of use people getting tricked into wire fraud transactions, or poor password, policies and their core systems. We aren't seeing, amongst I think the clients that we work with, these like really sophisticated attacks, leveraging the latest vulnerability. They are still very much, kind of focused around, kind of common attacks, exploiting, people's like basic lack of, kind of security awareness training, or, lack of basic MFA controls. So, yes, I will be curious to see how this evolves over the years, but it certainly seems from where, the applications that we're filling out now, that, there's a much more stringent requirement for a lot of these cybersecurity controls, and that's not going to lessen anytime soon.
I remember I was at an IT conference. I think it was 2018, and I went to a session on cybersecurity, and the organizer of the session was from the insurance industry. He basically said, "Look, we have no idea what we're doing. We're trying to figure this all out. We're trying to like develop basically an entire insurance industry around a completely new type of risk." So we've certainly seen them figuring it out a little bit more over the last year or two. But I think you're right, Matt. It's something that's going to continue to evolve pretty rapidly over the next few years. Before we move on to the next slide, and thank you all for everyone who's been submitting questions. Encourage you to continue to do that. Could you just speak a little bit more, Matt, about EDR and what it entails?
Sure. So I think it's helpful to understand EDR in the context of kind of traditional antivirus. So traditional antivirus looks for a certain virus definition, right? If this file exists on your computer, that's bad, and let's block it. EDR really goes, to the next step, where it does look for that standard, static file analysis, but then really goes into more, kind of behavioral based, like what is this process doing? Do we expect it to do that? And should it be doing that? And so it can block, kind of your standard, virus files, but that it can also block things like, malicious PowerShell, or in the Mac world, Bash scripting, or kind of other, other techniques that attackers have used to exploit computers. And so EDR combines a much more sophisticated analysis of, system processes and behavior, along with an ability to map out the process history. Where did this file get launched from? What are the preceding events? It can include a lot more lengthy logging. So again, some organizations, or if you have HIPAA compliance or other formal compliance standards, you may need to keep logs of what happened on a system for a year. And so EDR tools can help provide that sort of compliance and reporting. So you can say, well, whatever, this computer, 6 months ago, here's what happened, and we can go back and take a look at all of that. So it really combines, much more sophisticated process analysis, behavioral analysis, along with lengthy reporting to be able to provide that backwards visibility for what happened on a system over a certain period of time. So yeah, there's a lot of acronyms that are coming out now. EDR, now it's XDR is the new thing. I'm not sure I have quite a good handle on what all those acronyms are. But know that, at Community IT, we've had this type of tool in place for quite a while. It's been around for several years. It's a very big, buzzy space. There's lots of vendors that are getting into it. So there's a lot of marketing jargon that happens. But I think at its root, we see a lot of value in having these types of solutions in place, even though the actual amount of virus activity we see is relatively low.
Great, thank you, Matt. We're going to go quickly through the next one since we did talk about it a little bit at the beginning of the presentation. Supply chain challenges, that's a trend that we see continuing in 2022. I don't think there's anything more we need to say about it at this time. The next trend is mobile device management, which was an interesting trend. One other thing that we missed was that BlackBerry would finally shut down its services, although technically that happened, I think, on January 4th of 2022. So that you could still use a BlackBerry through all of 2021. That is no longer the case. People have been talking about mobile device management since the age of BlackBerry. So I'm curious, why are we noting it as a trend now in 2022?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's the combination of things that have been coming before us. So, this is the year that community IT finally, I don't know, I shouldn't say finally, like there's something, for a long time, we, community IT brought me my laptop, and it's owned and managed by community IT, and I use my community IT laptop for work, and no one else uses that laptop but me. And I don't really do my work on any other laptop. And that's all fine, but then I have my email on my phone. I need to have my email on my phone because I don't always have my laptop, but I do always need to be aware of email and folks reaching out to me, when I'm sometimes not on the clock. And that's a phone that I own, and it's my phone, and it's got all sorts of things on it besides work. And it's just become more and more important for organizations to sort of be aware of the cost of that. And Matt was talking about that when we were doing the review of the 2021 predictions. So there are now more ways to sort of solve those problems or address those concerns than there were in the past. So it's partly a prediction based on the fact that we're seeing the solutions are more available and easier to use and easier to manage than they used to be. So in 2021, we all had to enroll our personal phones in the Matt can talk about the technical details, but it's a Microsoft solution where basically, if I'm using Outlook to see my community, I can only use Outlook on my phone to see my community IT email. I can't use the Android email app. I have to use Outlook, and since Outlook is owned by Microsoft, it's part of that stack. If community IT needs to wipe all of the community IT email data off my phone, they can do that as long as it's on the internet and online. They can do that, and they don't have any. Community IT doesn't have access to the rest of my phone, but they do have access to the part of my phone that's doing my community IT work. And that kind of sandboxing and stuff, it just wasn't something it was very easy to do in the past. So that those changes have really changed. We are seeing also, as I think I said during the 2021 review slide, that we are seeing some of our clients saying, you know what, we want all of our staff to have company-owned phones. They're just going to have to carry two phones, and that's just the way it is. And we're seeing more of that as well. It's not common. It's not what everybody's doing, but it's happening more than it used to, and it's reasonable in certain circumstances to do that. Another thing that I would say happened in 2021 that I think was sort of when it happened the first time we did it. We've had clients request us to lock down SharePoint, which you can do, to only computers that are managed by Intune. So you have to, this works best when you're sort of in the stack completely, and that's one of the advantages of going with Microsoft up and down. But if you have a Windows operating system managed by Microsoft Intune, you can say that Microsoft SharePoint can only be synced. You can access it online in a browser. Actually, that's controllable too. But the granularity that we thought was best was staff can access the SharePoint online from any computer, as long as they have their username, password, and multi-factor authentication all triggered. But like if I'm at the public library, I don't have my laptop with me, I get a text, I need to edit a document right away, I can go to one of those kiosk computers and I can get online and see it. But I can't leave any traces of that data. I do it on an anonymous browser, do my little bit of work, close the anonymous browser, and I'm out. But if I want to sync that library, I need to be on a laptop that's owned and managed by the client. That's pretty cool. So there's a lot of things going on in this right now, and we're just. I'd say that what's changing the most is that the tools available are finally becoming accessible to small organizations, and because of that, there's always been a need, but a need that doesn't have a solution is a need that you kind of defer and don't worry about. What can you do? But if now there's a solution for it, then it's responsible to make use of that solution.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's not so much that the need is new, but the solutions are finally, the appropriate solutions are finally available. I remember 10, 15, maybe 10 years ago, MDM was, you have to buy 2 appliances. They cost $30,000 each. Like it was just a very expensive thing to have to do. And it was clearly geared towards very large corporate enterprise environments. And with Intune and other solutions, it's now something that small organizations can take advantage of. So on that note, we do at Community IT focus on appropriate and effective and affordable technology solutions, but sometimes it is nice to sort of look ahead down the road, what's coming. If you watch or read other posts about IT trends, chances are you're going to read about virtual reality. Facebook or Meta is obviously making some big moves in that area. Augmented reality is something that's becoming more and more talked about, at least. And then Web3, which includes things like cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and the blockchain. So we wanted to talk a little bit about our impressions of these more sort of bleeding edge technologies and what we see happening with them in 2022.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I think that the trend that that I would see related to specifically, I think Web3 and some of the blockchain stuff is, I think, a little bit of a backlash against maybe the awe and wonder and promise that maybe we had, I don't know, 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever this was viewed as really a transformative technology to have this kind of open distributed ledger concept, where everybody was going to be able to participate, and we didn't need to have, we're going to disintermediate everything. And so I think there's been some really significant and justified criticism against that. I think I'll link an article from Usenix that kind of talked about the costs associated with Web3, and again, it seems like a solution in search of a problem, and I think there's also a good kind of review or criticism from Marley Moxenspike, who is the creator of Signal, the encrypted communication platform. I think talking about whatever, whereas Web 1.0 was, as Johan mentioned, we all had clients and everybody managed a server in their office. With Web 2.0 being things going to the cloud, nobody wants to run and manage servers. Like I'm the CTO. Like I don't really want to run a server. I want to have a service and consume services and really focus on integration and kind of leveraging platforms. Web 3 seems a little bit like something the crypto crew is trying to promote, to talk about cryptocurrency. But I think there's a real legitimate backlash, I think, because of the model, because of how inefficient it is, the energy consumption. I think there's been a lot of pushback, and so I think we're starting to see that Mozilla Foundation has stopped accepting donations of cryptocurrency, and so I think we're going I think we're realizing, I think, the true impact of some of these solutions. And so I think there's going to be, receding of that. And maybe there'll be a new innovation into something, I think more capable and more transformative for us. Because I think, I remember going to an N10 session, many years ago, was talking about blockchain and how wonderful this was. But I think at the end of the day, the question is like, well, do you need blockchain? Or you just need a database. And I think the answer for, probably 99.9% of the cases are, you just need a database. And, kind of the blockchain is not something that is an appropriate solution for many use cases.
Yeah, and I think our take on VR and AR is that the technology just isn't there yet. It's sort of a little bit like the early days of Palm or maybe even the Apple Newton, where it's a great concept. Like if the technology were there, you could see a lot of interesting use cases for that technology solution. But our read on it is that the technology is not really. It's very expensive. Doesn't work really as well as it should, and there's probably a couple more years of development remaining before it gets to that point. We have about 5 minutes left. Fortunately, we only have 2 trends. If you have questions, please be sure to chat those in through the Q&A tool. So we wanted to end on a more pragmatic note, a highly pragmatic note: practical cybersecurity. And as you talk about this, Matt, we did have a question come in from someone saying, for all of us who are now designated CISOs, and I think that's maybe the accidental CISO is probably a trend that we should have put in this presentation, because a lot of you are going to be accidental CISOs in 2022. Do you have any training or certification recommendations? So if you could just kind of append that on to the end of this slide, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think in terms of trends, the secure by default is something that, if you've been a new entrant to getting, Office 365 set up, for example, a lot of the security defaults are already in place in terms of blocking old and outdated protocols, requiring MFA, limiting the number of, admins, that kind of thing. And so I think, the platforms themselves are implementing those controls. I think there's a big buzz. Salesforce is going to make MFA required here in the next month or so. So I think the platforms themselves are taking more responsibility to ensure that they are used in the most secure manner possibly, and I think that's a great trend that we'll see continue. So again, having those secure defaults available and required out of the box is great. I would also say that so for the next one, Microsoft makes monitoring easy, and that is true. So they have some really great tools within their platform that are available at the higher tiers. I think one thing I would love to see is for, those security features to be available to everyone, even if they're not paying, for the most expensive tier. And I think that's, a real problem with some of these cloud solutions is that, you're only getting the best features if you're kind of turning up and really paying a lot for your licensing. And I think because the security is so important, the capabilities are within the platform. I think it's important for vendors to make that available to all their customers at a base level, not something that's kept at only for the most expensive security tiers. And then finally, I think, this kind of idea of like zero trust or cloud access service brokers, where we're really switching the model from, hey, as long as you can get to this service, you can try to log in, and then we'll test, we'll accept your username and password. I think is really going to start to shift more to, we're only going to allow connections from trusted devices or trusted locations. We're going to prompt for that reauthentication. Something that I think is going to, to finally take hold here in 2022, where, we're going to really shift the model. I think organizations have, made good progress in implementing multi-factor authentication. I think, the tools are improving in terms of being able to manage devices, whether they be corporate owned, personally owned, to kind of put those controls in place. So there's a bit more validation around where those connections are coming from. So I think that's what I see on the, on the practical cybersecurity side for this year.
So before we're going to run a few minutes over. I hope you can stay with us. And if not, it is being recorded and you can catch the last few slides on our YouTube channel. But before we go to the last trend, which are sector trends, I did want to let everybody know we're going to have a very special webinar next month. We are partnering with Your Part-Time Controller, which is a nationwide financial services firm that focuses on nonprofit organizations. And we're going to be joining forces with them to share how to protect your organization from wire fraud. So it's continuing with this theme of cybersecurity. It's going to be a great webinar, and really encourage you to sign up for it. So, but let's finish with our last trend, the sector trends. What do we see happening in the nonprofit sector as a whole in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is, for me, it's, I think maybe some wishful thinking or, some optimism, but I do think that, in 2022, foundations or fiscal sponsors, I think, are going to make a shift from being hands off or kind of to funding IT projects, to being really specific around saying, hey, this is what we know nonprofit organizations need to be, secure and kind of well managed, and we're going to provide that to all of our grantees. And so, the answer for a lot of these cybersecurity solutions isn't hard. The tools are out there. They just need to be implemented and managed well. And so I think this is going to finally be the year where foundations or fiscal sponsors are being really proactive and saying, hey, we're going to make sure that the organizations that we're providing funding to have the right tools and equipment in place so that they can focus on their mission and not worry about all the cybersecurity stuff. And so we're going to fund that, and we're going to actually, kind of pay and provide and vet the solutions that are implemented. So I think that's something that I think is going to be a shift in 2022. I also think that kind of the next one, nonprofit pay jumps to remain competitive. I think we're seeing this, kind of in our hiring. Salaries in general have risen, and I think risen pretty significantly. It's very competitive landscape out there, and I think nonprofit organizations are going to need to make some significant improvements. Pay always has kind of traditionally lagged in the nonprofit sector, and I think the really competitive and effective nonprofits are going to identify that and be proactive about raising their salaries so that they can maintain kind of a competitive edge and increase the impact. I think one of the things that we didn't identify as a trend, but I think we've certainly seen in 2021, is that I think overall the sector seems like it's growing and growing significantly. In 2020, I think there was a lot of people seem to be holding the line. There was a lot of I think conservative approach in terms of our growth and uncertainty. At this point, from where we sit, we're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of demand, both within our existing client base and then new organizations that are coming to us. So overall, it seems like the sector is very, the nonprofit sector is very healthy and is growing. And so I do think that the pay is going to be a part of that. And then finally, on the cyber side of things, I do think we'll finally get to a place where, this term, a Geneva Convention for cybersecurity is defined and maybe enforced. So that effectively means that, certain industries or sectors are going to be off limits for cyber attacks. So again, hospitals, they shouldn't be attacked by ransomware just because they have a vulnerability. And so making sure that, there are certain guardrails that are put up to protect, vulnerable organizations, from cyber attacks, and have that codified, into law, maybe international law. It's been something that, this is not a new concept. A lot of big thinkers are talking about this and have been talking about this for quite some time. But I think this is the year that it finally happens.
Let's hope so. I mean, that would be an important advance in international diplomacy, and I think you're largely talking about nation state threat actors. All right. Well, thank you all for being with us today. As I mentioned before, we have a great webinar lined up for February. We're going to be working with your part-time controller to provide sort of a joint IT finance webinar on how to protect your organization from wire fraud. Thank you for all the great questions today. We did actually have two questions that were related on artificial intelligence. Are we seeing anything with AI? Is that something that what is your hot take? I'll just ask you that.
The hot take is I actually like Microsoft Viva and it going through and telling me what I need to do for the day. So I think that like some of the basic stuff like that, I really find valuable. You know, Steve and I
different sides of the fence on that. I just wrote back to Jennifer Keller Jackson that I'm not impressed. But you're right. That's what we're seeing it the most.
Yep.
Google and Microsoft are definitely trying to innovate with AI. They think that it can be a differentiator, and it probably can be. I just don't think it's there yet. But if it's useful to Matt, it's useful to other people. You know, different people get different things from that. But that's all AI. You know, it's like it's some machine is parsing your emails and your clicks and saying these are files you should know about. These are things you should follow up on.
I scheduled a meeting yesterday, and the little Viva thing popped up and said, you know, you made this meeting for an hour. You might want to allow a little downtime after your meeting. Do you want to change it to 45 minutes instead? And I was like, well, AI has come a long way. So anyways, and you know, Viva would be unhappy that we went 6 minutes over on this webinar. But thank you all so much for joining us today. As we mentioned before, this recording and the slides will be up on our YouTube channel, and we hope you can join us next month. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.